let's just stop for a second and understand what we're dealing with. This is the clown who used to try and play a piano with his genitalia. This is not a serious political figure. This is not some great geostrategic strategist or anything else. And secondly, he's known to use a lot of cocaine. And I think maybe some of that is intruding into his political life. I wouldn't take anything this man says seriously at all, under any circumstances. He's effectively been on the outs and hung out to dry now for over a year. He is raking in large quantities of cash that he and his supporters are squirreling away in various bank accounts. He is really consigning Ukraine to death, and he's doing it gleefully because he's enriching himself in the process. And people keep telling me, well, Doug, why don't some Ukrainian generals step forward and tell us that, what the truth is, and why don't they throw off this man's influence? Because they're all on the take. They're all being paid. This is a giant charade. It has been from the beginning, but now it's turned into a tragedy on a scale that I don't think any of us have seen in decades.
The next level of fiction that he talked about here is not just that their success means peace for all the world, but that they're going to take their place as a leading European power. Watch this.
Для України це, безперечно, бути сильною частиною глобального світу, бути на рівних з усіма країнами-лідерами, бути в Євросоюзі та в НАТО, бути там повноправно, бути там – це справедливо для нас. Слава Україні!
Before there was any conflict, Ukraine was the poorest nation in Europe and the most corrupt. So by what kind of fantasy can anyone say that after this catastrophic destruction and the loss of millions of its people, both dead and abroad, that they're going to become an equal footing with the likes of Germany and UK and France and some of those others? That just seems to me maybe to be the most disjointed.
It's complete nonsense. I memean, he might as well stand up there and tell everyone that Santa Claus died in the same car wreck that killed the Good Fairy and Smokey the Snowman or whatever. This is absurd nonsense. Frosty, rather. It's not Smokey. Right. This is all absurd nonsense. This is pure theater. He has orders to maintain the facade that there is a real Ukrainian state with a real economy, a real armed force, and a real government until after the election. That's his job. He's got to keep this up until the election is over. Then everyone in Washington is going to say, well, we did all we could, and wash their hands of this fiasco. But right now, it's as though you're sitting at the dinner table in Washington, D.C., and you have this sort of steaming pile of excrement in the middle of the dinner table. Everybody knows what it is and wants to remove it, but nobody is willing to be the first person to stand up and say, let's get rid of this. So they're going to let it sit there until after the election. And at the same time, they have a new pile growing at the other end of the dinner table in the Middle East.
If that was the most crazy thing that you've heard, there was actually one a little bit more crazy. Let's remind everybody that the entirety of 2023, Russia spent primarily on the defensive, and Ukraine spent around 6 to 9 months preparing for an offensive that was crushed and broke its teeth on the first of 5 lines of defense, never even made it past that. And in light of that and all of the losses they've suffered in the 12 months since that time, Zelensky says he's going to force Russia into peace.
Ми, українці, разом з нашими партнерами, ми повинні змінити обставини так, щоб війна закінчилась безвідносно до того, що хоче Путін. Ми всі повинні змінити обставини так, щоб Росія була примушена до миру. Якщо почати рухатися цією ідеєю, з цим конкретним планом перемоги саме зараз, то може вдатися завершити війну не пізніше, ніж наступного року.
Now, you may think that just based on that one clip there, well, he must mean a negotiated settlement next year. But he, elsewhere in that speech, rejected any possibility of trading land for peace. No terrain back to the 1991 borders will be given to Russia. So the only thing he can mean there is he's going to win a war. Given what they've already failed and the losses in the 12 consecutive months since, I don't get it, Doug.
Well, he's obviously been conferring with his military advisors, General Petraeus, General Cavoli, General Keane, who knows, General Hodges, and they're prompting him to say these things. At the same time, he's talking to the people that are bankrolling him, people at the top of the CIA and MI6, people in London and Washington, and they're saying, have at it. Keep it up to the last possible moment. It's hard for Americans right now to understand how completely misinformed they are and how little truth they've been told over the last 3 years. It's tragic, Dan, but that's where we are.
Here is the cream of the crop. Zelensky's laid out this plan, right? He's talked about the things that they're going to do and how he's going to force Russia. And now then here he's going to explain how he's going to do that. Now, as he gets to a key moment, the camera's going to pin over to their commander of their armed forces, General Syrski, and watch his face and tell me if you think that he agrees with what's being said.
Перший пункт – це запрошення в НАТО. Зараз. Другий пункт – оборона. Це незворотнє зміцнення української оборони проти агресора. Це реалістично захищати наші позиції на полі бою в Україні і водночас обов'язково повертати війну на територію Росії.
So his plan is we're going to join NATO right now and invade Russia and everything's going to work out fine.
You notice that everyone stood up and clapped. They're well paid. They too have benefited from the largesse of our billions pumped into Ukraine. And I suspect that Syrski is probably saying to himself, am I going to be able to get out of here before all of this collapses? Is the escape route set up? Am I going to fly, drive, float, whatever out of the area? I think a lot of people are probably saying that to themselves quietly right now. That's where we are. It's a fact. This thing is over. But as I pointed out, they want to keep this rolling until the election is over. Then they'll wash their hands of it, just as we washed our hands of Saigon and South Vietnam. We'll do the same thing here.
Yeah, I think so. And I just wonder, though, how people, even in public, even in the media, can take any of this seriously at all. For example, aside from all those things I just showed you, Ukrainian's UN ambassador made a tweet afterwards to amplify some of the things he said. And they said that, hey, it's not such a bad idea that inviting Ukraine into NATO, that would remove the main bone of contention between Kiev and Moscow and make them quit fighting. And the exact opposite is the truth. Russia has said from the outset that it was NATO into Ukraine which prompted the war. Jens Stoltenberg publicly admitted that Putin told them that if you take NATO off the table, there doesn't have to be a war, but if it is on there will be fighting, and we rejected it, etc. By what any kind of twisted logic can you say now that would take it off the table? And how can anyone in the West put any serious stock behind that?
There is a scene in the film Downfall, Untergang, with the great Bruno Ganz, who gives, I think, a pretty good performance as Hitler in April 1945. And as he's about to go into his private apartments, shoot his girlfriend and himself through the head, one of the women in the hallway, who's some sort of assistant or stenographer, says, "But mein Führer, what about the final victory and gültiger Sieg, the final victory? What about it?" He just looks at her, gives her a dirty look, goes to the door, shuts the door, and the rest is history. I think you're going to have that kind of reaction in large parts of Europe and the United States when it happens. That's the tragedy. People are actually going to say, my God, what happened? How could this be? I don't know what you can do about it, but the truth will eventually come out. And when the truth comes out, there's going to be hell to pay. I think the truth is actually seeping out today in France, in Germany, even in Great Britain, which is probably the worst when it comes to suppressing the truth through its media and government than the rest, I'm sorry to say.